NICE uses a slightly different approach. It uses a separation between your application business logic and your physical objects. This requires a little bit more setup, but saves you time in the long run. If you're familiar with object-oriented design or even object-based design, this approach will be familiar. If you're not, however, this can seem quite complex and definitely needs a more technical mindset or systems architecture or applications architecture mindset to be able to start to develop the automations within NICE. This creates a good separation between the underlying application and business entities which require more technical resource and the business logic which sits above that. So it lets you build separate teams with different levels of skills that are able to maintain the underlying applications. So what happens is the business entities are built to access all the underlying physical objects, and then the automations themselves never access those physical objects. They only ever access the business entities. If something should change within one of the physical objects, then only the business entities are changed, and then the automations will continue to run. Let's have a look at the NICE application to see how that looks in practice when you open up the application. I've done a little prior setup and captured the information from the training CRM, and you can see that displayed on the screen, and we're on the tab Physical Objects. But what I've also done is set up a program hierarchy, and I'm going to look at that over here. If you can see that, that's better. I've set up a program hierarchy, and we've called the project Demo, and Demo consists of 4 different modules. You've got at the bottom of the layer the physical objects layer, which we've captured all of the information, and you may have one team who's been responsible for that. Above that layer you've got business entities, and this is the layer which we're going to sort of look at in a bit more detail and see how we develop those business entities. You then have a presentation layer, which we've seen before. This is the inputs and outputs that you may put in place to either access existing applications or to create some new interfaces, such as the input screen we saw last time. And you can do the same within NICE. And then you've got the business logic, and the business logic only ever accesses the business entities and the inputs and outputs via the presentations layer. Although technically, and when you're just trying something out quickly, you can put all of this logic into a single file. So you can create business entities, for example, just within a single module. However, for reuse and reusability, this hierarchy that we looked at is the ideal solution. So I'm going to select the business entities layer, and I've already started to create some business entities. So let's have a look at what I've started to do, and then we'll come back to how I've done it. Since the business logic can't access the physical objects, everything I need to do to those physical objects needs to be able to be defined within a business entity. So our business entity contains all of the fields that we're going to use, and contains now functions that go and do actions upon the physical entities. So we're going to see a number of functions such as add contact, which goes away and presses the add contact button. We're going to see functions such as copy details, which in a similar way to what we've seen before, will take details from our presentation layer and move those details into the fields within the application. We're going to see a new contact function, which goes away and clicks the new contact button. And we're going to see the select contacts button, which function, which goes away and clicks on the tab that selects the correct screen that we need to enter details into. So all the functionality that we're creating here is exactly the same as we've done before, except now each of those different actions are being put into separate functions. And those functions will be called very simply from a workflow that we create when we start to build the application logic. We've also got a number of workflow steps. So we've added some extra variables that we'll create as that logic executes. Another thing about the nice application that differs significantly from the way that we looked at the application in Win Automation is that you have to define wait steps if you want to wait for the underlying application to come back before you do the next step. Nice will let you run actions as quickly as possible. Whereas Win Automation has a number of defaults built in that simply says, I'm going to wait until this action is completed before I run the next action. This is both an advantage because you can now make the most efficient use of time, but it's also a little more complex because you have to consider what you need to do as you move from step to step. Another example of efficiencies created by creating objects is what's highlighted on the screen here in the circles. We create the concept of contact details, which is email, first name, surname, and title. But we do that just once, and then we create 3 separate instances of that when we start to connect those fields, first of all to the contact CRM, then to our presentation layer, and then eventually when we start to connect to the second application, which is Untitled. So we only need to define it once, and we can start to create separate instances throughout the whole application. Again, this takes a little bit more time to set up, but saves you time in the long run, but also ensures a little bit of consistency. I'm not going to spend too much time on business entities because it's well beyond the scope of this training course. But I'm introducing the concept here so you understand that different applications approach things in different ways and provide different pros and cons to being able to develop your underlying applications. Before starting to develop an application, we will normally put together something that looks similar to this. This shows us the physical objects, which we've seen many times now, but also now starts to build up the logical business entities. First of all, highlighted or bolded are all of the actions that we need to undertake upon the underlying data as part of the business logic. We've then created a number of additional new variables, these along here, which actually are going to be set to certain values when actions are complete. So for example, when on our capture screen, which we've set up before to enter the key data in, and we click OK, at that point we will have a variable which sets to say, yep, it's ready, and we'll set that to true. The data entry is complete. Likewise, we'll have a variable that's sitting there waiting for the CRM application to launch. We will start launching the application, but only when it's finally live and ready to interact with the user will the CRM launched flag be set to true. All of these flags allow us to create wait states within our workflow to say I'm going to wait for the application to complete loading before I try to do the next step. If I try to do the next step of clicking the contacts tab before I've waited for the application to launch, then obviously it won't find it and it would fail. So this is a little bit more complicated, but when you lay it out in a screen like this, it documents it very easily, and by the time you come to coding it in the application, you absolutely takes no time whatsoever. So I've changed to my business entities module. I've got all my physical objects stored now in a separate file, and now I'm going to start building my business entities. And as we looked at in the previous discussion, we've got 2 further tabs down here, one called types and one called instances. So these types will let us set up the details that we need to use within our application. And these are just fields that we're going to use within the application. They're just definitions at this stage. But we're also going to have some functions, and these functions are now starting to interact with our underlying application. So we can start to see that the CRM add contact will do the click button action of the add contact form, the new training CRM application. Similarly, the CRM copy details assigns the value from each of the input fields to the text within the application, and so on. We've built all our requirements for the application within our business entities rather than within our workflow. We've also added a number of these new variables which we're going to use and assign values to as the application begins to run. So let's have a look at how we might create a function within one of these applications. So we've created a function that's going to be called CRM new contact, and the CRM new contact is the action of clicking the button on, if you recall, the very front page of the CRM application. How do we build this up within our application? Well, I'm going to insert an instruction and repeat what we've already put in here. So creating a new function. And here's where we start to see how we build up the hierarchy of physical objects. So the very first thing I'm going to need to do is go into the physical objects layer. We're going to look at the screen elements, and we're going to look at the training CRM application. We know within the training CRM application there are two forms. There is the main form, which we see when the application opens, and the new contacts dialog box, both of which we've captured all the elements for already. So we go into the training CRM. The very first layer that we see within the training CRM is the tab control, which we're going to click on to activate the contacts tab. Within that control, we see two tabs. We've got the accounts tab, the one we started on, and the contacts tab. And it's the button that we want to click. So we'll click on that to select the button, and we'll set the action of click. So we now are clicking on that button, and that's how you build up each of the instructions within the application. So the new contact function will go away and simply click on all of that hierarchy. All of our application logic will now call the CRM new contact to access that information. And we could have several different applications and automations that are running that new contact button. If then the underlying application changes and something needs to be adapted, then we only need to adapt that change within our business entity here, and all of the applications that use that will access that change, as opposed to accessing the physical objects directly, which would mean we would have to change all of the occurrences within the original, or sorry, not the original, with all of the application automations that we've developed. We'll now move on to look at the presentation layer within NICE. Within NICE, there are two different concepts that fall into the presentation layer. The first is the concept of callouts. This is similar to the custom dialog we looked at before, something you build to interact with your end user. There's a second type of information that's stored in the presentation layer, and these are called launch in context items. These items simply give references to the underlying applications, either their physical location in the case of Windows applications, or their web address in the case of browser-based applications. So we're going to look at how those types of definitions are set up, and we're going to build a call out similar to what we did before. So I've loaded now my presentation layer, and I've gone into the presentation section. And what I want to do is create a new call out. And down here we've got two tabs. The first is call out, and the second is the launch in context. So let's have a look at building a brand new call out. So let's go to new blank call out, and we get a screen. What we can start to do now is build up the components of this screen. So like before, we're going to put in title, first name, surname, and email. And we want to insert 3 fields. So I'll go up here to have a look at the different types of fields that I can insert. And obviously the first one is going to be a simple input text box. Now, it doesn't just stop there, because I want to be able to link this field or bind this field to the business entity that we've built. So we've built an entity already called to contain all of the data from this call out. So let's have a look and see what we can see. So we'll go and look at assignment, and we want to assign that field to our business entities. And we've created this business entity called the contact details input, which simply contains the 4 fields that we're going to store. So we can reference that data directly. And the first field is title. Good, so we've selected that. And likewise, we're going to move on and do that for each of the remaining items, binding them to the business entities. First name, business entities, done. New field, input text box, right click, assignment, business entities, surname, and finally our email address. Okay, there are 4 input fields. So now all we need to do is insert an OK button. Good. Okay, so we've completed the dialog. Let's have a quick preview to see how that looks. Great. Now we can do a little bit more with the formatting, but I'm not going to do that for the purpose of this exercise, but you can control quite a lot of the details, the style and the colours, etc. of the dialog box. But for now, I'm just going to stick with the default. Just going to give that a new name. And save my progress. So creating the presentation layer interacts directly again with the business objects, populating the fields within the business objects so we can reference them then when we're developing our own functions. The other item that we needed to set up was the launching context, and all of this does is contain the information about where applications sit. So our application CRM, we can see located in this location on the C drive. And for the Insightly, we can see that it's located at wizard.insight.ly. So we've now built our physical objects, we've built our business entities, and we've built our presentation layer. We're now missing only the most important component, which is the actual workflow, the steps we go through to deliver the business logic. In the final step of our demonstration using NICE, we're going to build the workflow that runs through to deliver the actions that we've already defined as part of our process mapping exercise. Now, the demo I've produced here for NICE is an interactive demo working at the desktop, but NICE operates both as an attended and an unattended solution, and can also be quite comprehensive in the fact that it can sit there waiting for certain actions to appear or events to appear on the screen, and then take action and initiate a workflow as a result of that. So you can build both workflows which are triggered by the user, or event handlers which are triggered by an action the user has taken. So I'm going to be armed with my paper in hand that contains the list of the steps, the entities that we're going to access, and the variables that we're going to use to make sure that each of the components have completed before we move to the next step. So we're now going to develop our workflow. So I've already loaded the business logic module, and our first step is to create a new workflow. And it puts start up there. The first step of our process is going to be to launch our new dialog box for data entry. So let's have a look at what we need to do. First of all, we'll insert an instruction, and we're going to go to our presentation layer. We're going to look for our callouts, and we're going to enter our single entry form, and we're going to show that form on the screen. Okay. And it will be shown in the center of the screen. We can now key the enter into that information, click the OK button. So we're going to need to next put in a transition rule. The transition rule is that data entry is complete. And we've already set up a flag within our application to indicate that that data entry is ready. So we'll go to our business entities, our workflow steps, and we'll look for the flag which becomes true at the point that data entry is complete. So we want to know data entry complete equals true. Okay, so our first transition is complete. So effectively the automation will be sitting there on the single entry data screen and not do anything more while the user interacts with that dialog box. At the point that the user finishes interacting with that dialog box, the trigger is implemented, and the trigger indicates that we can now move on to the next step. So the next thing we need to do is launch the CRM app. So we're going to put in a new step. That new step is going to be called launch. CRM. And we'll insert the instruction to actually display the CRM application. Now, if you recall, this is again in our presentation layer, and it's an in-context item, app CRM. All the details relating to where that app resides is in there, and all we have to do is select the right instruction, which is show. So we can now show that on the screen. Our next transition step then is going to be that the CRM has launched. So the automation is waiting for the application to load up and not simply move on to the next instruction. And again, we've set up a trigger. In our business entities, which becomes true at the point that the application appears on the screen. And that field is should be called CRM launched. Oh, there we go. CRM launched equals true. Great. So we've now launched the CRM. It's on the screen, and the first action we do is click on the Contacts tab. So that's our next step. connect my transition in. I can always tidy up my boxes later. And this step is to select contacts. Oops. Try that again. Select contacts tab. You may recall that we created a function to do exactly that. So all that we're doing here in the workflow is going to be calling upon that function. That's in our business entities. And we created a function called select contacts. Great. So we've launched the CRM, we've selected the contacts. So the next transition is going to be that the contact screen is available. So contacts screen displayed. It's a trigger transition. There we go. So our add contact screen is loaded. And we need to make sure that is equals to true. So we've launched the CRM, checked the CRM is launched, we've selected the contacts tab, we've checked the contacts tab is there. So next we need to click on the new button. Just join my transition in. Press new button and the instruction function invocation, business entities, functions, CRM new contact. That is what presses the new button. Okay. So our next transition, then is to make sure that the new contact screen is there. Okay, so we'll add a new condition, business entities, our workflow steps, and we're looking for the add contact screen is loaded equals true. Great. So we've now pressed the new button and the screen is loaded. So our next step is going to be to copy across the details. New step. Copy details. And this copies the details from our dialog box into the actual CRM application. Great. We are almost there. The details are copied. It just now remains for us to save those details. Click Add button will be our next step. And we've got an instruction in our business entities. Click Add Contact. And the transition is data copied, complete. CRM details copied, there we go, equals true, and our last transition is simply contact added. And our final action on our last instruction is simply going to be to go back to our launching context items, look at our app and close it down. So, phew, that's all of the steps complete, and we're now ready to trial it out. Before running the first workflow, what I'm going to do is just check the validation. This button up here just validates that everything is correct. Cool. So we're ready to go. To run the application then, we click on the play button up here. Separate robot runs to automate the process, and we'll see the option for all of our workflows to be available to the user. So we didn't name our workflow, we just kept it as new workflow. So I'm just going to click play. Our dialog box has appeared. Okay, the moment of truth. Great. So what you've seen there is the process run, open the contact screen, store the details, and of course we would go on and develop the second half of the application, which was be to access Untitled. Let's just cancel that. Stop the workflow. And we're done. Not being paranoid at all, my one last test is to check that Mrs. Pac-Man is there in the training database. So that data has gone in all successfully. You will have noticed that the application ran a little faster than the early one in Win Automation, and this is true. One of the things you will start to spot is that different applications working in different ways will actually run at slightly different speeds. Many of them in fact have different options which can massively improve performance depending on how you configure them. So as you learn more about the capabilities of the application, you can start to configure and tailor to get the best performance out of the application. So this is it for our demonstration of NICE.